Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on the historical impacts the historical human impacts on the Seine River. I want to first acknowledge that we are coming to you today on Treaty 1 territory, homeland of the Manitoba Métis Nation. And my name is Chris Garner, and this is Elena Mark, who will be hosting with me today. We are instructors with Eclectic Communications, who are really pleased to be privileged and pleased to be partnering with Save Our Seine on this presentation today. So we're here for an hour. I just want to let you know that, so we're going to go through a bunch of information, historical information on the riverways, and we'll have a question period at the end. We have two members of the Save Our Sane board with us today who are going to be available with some sort of more expert advice. So we have Richard. Sorry, I'm learning how to use this screen where I can keep my notes at the same on the same side. So we have Chris Pennerman. He's a Save Our Sane volunteer and applied ecologist. He does a lot of riparian restoration and volunteer work with Save Our Sane. And then we also have Richard Remnant here, who is on the board of directors, and he's a retired fisheries biologist. So they'll be available to us today to offer some extra information and feedback and questions. So if you have questions that show up during the presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat so that we can then address them when we have some space during our time together or at the very end of the presentation itself. Okay, so our workshop objectives for today. Elena, you
All
want
right. Yeah. Hi, everybody. So during this hour-long webinar, we will be exploring topics related to understanding the historical impacts of human activities on the Seine River watershed in both the historical and modern times. We'll examine the ecological consequences of these actions, and through that, also highlight the impacts on the water and aquatic ecosystems from the beginning of the headwaters all the way to the Red River. Um, we will finish the presentation by sharing some of the strategies that Save Our Seine has employed for helping manage those impacts, and also what you can do to help the Seine. And then, like Chris said, some time for questions at the end. So the Seine River watershed. A watershed is an area of land that collects rainfall and snowmelt and then drains that water into a common point, such as the Seine River. The Seine River watershed begins at the Sandylands near Marchand, Manitoba. And prior to 1900s, this area was a vast land of bog and marsh, which you can see on this map is the dark green kind of in the lower right-hand side. Now, a healthy and intact watershed helps to sustain a flow into its common point, which would be the Seine River here, saving water during wet periods to help maintain the flow during dry times. This map that we're seeing here shows the rural watershed of the Seine River. Historically, this drainage area was around 2,150 square kilometers, which is roughly 350,000 football fields or 4.5 times the size of Winnipeg. So it's a huge, vast land. However, drainage and diversion have significantly altered this number, which we will look at later in the session. Now, you'll note on this map that there are various colors of green. The dark green identifies the historical permanent wetland areas. The slightly lighter green are the historical semi-permanent wetland areas. And then, all of that has been converted into agricultural land in the last 125 years.
I
So,
snuck in.
hi, welcome. So the urban Seine River watershed lies in the southeast corner of the city, and this includes St. Boniface and parts of Transcona and St. Vital. It flows north through the city until it meets the Red River, and then the Red River flows north into Lake Winnipeg. So you can see how everything is connected from, this huge part of our province.
Mhm.
Now, To make the land suitable for agriculture, we could go to the next slide, Chris. Next slide, Chris. Thank you. Um, to make the land suitable for agriculture, early settlers in the 1900s excavated shovel ditches through two large wetlands in areas that we now know as St. Anne and Lorette, which created the present day continuous flow from St. Anne to Winnipeg. Over time, additional ditches have been dug to drain wetlands in preparation to expand mainly farmland. The land has been cleared to also harvest natural resources such as sand, peat moss, trees, and then, of course, there are recreational areas that have also been manicured and established in the area. The result of this extensive draining and development in the Seine River watershed is that it drastically impacts the water table, which disrupts land and aquatic ecosystems from the headwaters all the way to Lake Winnipeg. So, livestock and agricultural practices. The Seine River watershed is home to a very intensely developed hog industry in Manitoba. Runoff from the animal manure, along with pesticide runoff from the industrial scale farms in the area, have added to extreme nutrient loading into the Seine River. Nutrient loading of nitrogen and phosphorus in these ways has led to eutrophication downstream. Now, eutrophication is basically like suffocating a fish. It's the process in which a body of water receives an abundance of dissolved nutrients, leading to excessive growth of algae and aquatic plants. And then that growth of plants, when they eventually decompose, they use up all the available oxygen. They produce large amounts of carbon dioxide, and then it's totally deadly to the aquatic ecosystem. And it creates a lot of toxicity in the water, especially, and that can be impacted, or that does impact those who rely on this as a water source. Like, think about all the animals that come drink there, the plants who rely on it, and everything like that. Now, according to the Water Quality Management section of Manitoba Water Stewardship, in studies done on the Seine River near the South Perimeter between 1973 and 1999, the nitrogen levels during that time had increased 75% and phosphorus 180%. So you can only imagine what those numbers would be now, another 25 years later. The effects of this are felt in every body of water downstream, including the Red River and Lake Winnipeg. And this is a huge part of the reason that Lake Winnipeg is suffering from extensive algae blooms and all the problems, because the whole system is connected. Now, development and the flooding issues. The Seine River's recent history has also seen intensive urbanization. As Winnipeg and surrounding areas have developed over time, more and more people have felt the impacts of the drainage of these wetlands in the way of flooding, right? Because the wetlands used to absorb and keep and maintain all of this water and have a steady flow into the Seine. But without those wetlands, the water just has no way of taking its time. It kind of rushes in, right? Urban development around the Seine has also significantly altered its natural landscape, with wetlands and forests being cleared to make way for housing, roads, and other infrastructure. The loss of natural vegetation has reduced the river's ability to absorb and slow down runoff, like I had mentioned, making flooding more frequent and way more severe. In response, extensive draining and diversion systems were built to control water flow. However, these engineered solutions also disrupt natural habitats and reduce the ecological health of the river corridor. Additionally, dumping of garbage and construction materials along the banks of the Seine River was commonplace for many years, basically since settlers came here. So much so that by 1973, the urban Seine River was called Winnipeg's longest longitudinal garbage dump. So old construction materials and vehicle parts had been seen sticking out along the riverbank in some areas. And these are known as complex riverbanks, and they comprise approximately 30% of the urban Seine. I think Chris from Save Our Seine had mentioned like trying to dig holes to plant trees and then remembering, oh, this was like an old place for concrete dumping, right? So you can't really plant a tree if there's concrete underneath a few inches of soil. And then the picture that we see here is a picture of St. Boniface and Point Douglas in an extreme flood situation. So in 1960s, the St. Anne diversion was constructed to reduce flooding along the Seine River. Between 1919 and 1955, that region had experienced 6 major floods, which prompted the project. The diversion redirects water just upstream of St. Anne, sending it about 35 kilometers west to the Red River. You can actually see this on that watershed map, the urban watershed map that we had shared earlier. That is available on the Save Our Seine website. It's very interesting because you can see kind of the natural flows of the river, and then this just like very straight diversion of where this 35-kilometer diversion is. Now, the St. Anne diversion also intercepts several agricultural drains and connects with the Manning Canal, which also leads to the Red River. So together, these diversions, just these two ones here, and the agricultural drains, have actually reduced the natural Seine watershed by roughly 1/3 or 33%. So that water that used to flow into the Seine is now going directly into the Red River. The Red River floodway. The Red River floodway was started in 1962, and again, an effort to divert water from the Red River now around Winnipeg during floods. Because the floodway would effectively cut the Seine River into two, an underground siphon was installed to permit the Seine River to cross the floodway, but it crosses by gravity. During floods on the Seine River, water flows into the floodway through an overflow structure, diverting it before it reaches Winnipeg and then also helping to reduce flooding. However, there have been problems with this, of course, as something that's, you know, was built in 1962. So there's leakage and a trash rack that was frequently blocked by debris, which caused significant reduction of flow upstream, sometimes resulting in even only a trickle of water entering the Seine River into the urban Seine. In 2009, the province addressed these issues by updating the system to maximize the amount of water flowing into Winnipeg. The Red River floodway itself has reduced the inflow into the urban Seine by about 188 kilometers squared. It does that by intercepting multiple agricultural drains, which now flow into the floodway instead of into the urban Seine. All of this redirection of water, although helpful to prevent flooding to us humans, it also has significantly reduced the flow and volumes to the lower Seine River, which really impacts aquatic habitats and the river connectivity. While flood risks have decreased, ecological risks such as lower water levels and loss of aquatic habitat have really increased. Small fish might be able to pass through the floodway going downstream, but it's so unlikely that any of the fish are able to pass upstream, which is an important part of kind of fish's life journey. The Grand Point diversion is another diversion, which is located just upstream of the Red River floodway near Highway 59 and the community of Grand Point. It functions as a control structure that diverts high Seine River flows along Highway 59 into the floodway during flood conditions. So its purpose is to offer flood protection for Grand Point and surrounding low-lying areas. However, as you can see in this picture here, the trash rack at Grand Point Diversion Inlet can plug with woody debris and weeds, sometimes causing water to divert when it shouldn't. Like if it's actually a low flow, but nothing can get through, then the water isn't going through. It's just simply going around or into the diversion. And that significantly reduces the flow which enters the urban Seine. Water extraction and drought stress is also another huge impact that we see on the Seine River. So across the watershed, licensed water withdrawals add to the stress on the waterway. For example, golf courses can withdraw, they're permitted to extract up to 9.9 million liters of water per day for irrigation. If they all, like if all the golf courses along the Seine extracted to their capacity, it would 9.9 million liters of water. It's a huge amount. And those amounts actually remain allowable even during drought conditions. With this level of extraction combined with reduced watershed and the cumulative effects of agricultural drains and flood diversions, the impact on the river's flow is very significant. Healthy aquatic systems rely on a consistent base flow to support fish, invertebrates, and riparian vegetation. However, in dry years, the flow can drop to almost nothing. Periods of extremely low flow threaten habitat connectivity, water quality, and the overall resilience of the Seine River ecosystem. Yeah, I'm not sure if any of you have ever paddled the Seine, but I know I have a few times, and I'm always shocked sometimes at how fast it can run, and then there can be like 2 inches of water, and you can get a canoe through a lot of things, but not that. All right, I'll pass it back to Chris.
And here's just an example, another picture of one of the low flow years on the Seine that Lena was talking about. So we've seen that a lot more in our, oh, I'm sorry, in our drought years. I'm just going to admit someone else to the room here. All right. So some of you may be St. Patel residents and familiar with some of the names I'm about to mention. So the flow on the Seine River has actually been important to a lot of historical Winnipeggers who've lived here. So along the banks of the Seine River have been home to Gabrielle Roy, who is a famous writer, school trustee, and sort of community leader Victor Major, whom the school is named after, lived along the banks. Marianne Gabory, who was the first European woman to settle here and also the grandmother of Louis Riel and the Métis leader and founder Manitoba, as well as her husband Jean-Baptiste Lagimodier lived along the river. And their son, Louis Riel Sr., actually operated a river-powered grits mill along the river. And so this mill was required some damming and ditches and draining to be built. And you can actually see it around John Bruce Road. There's still some remnants of the mill itself. The actual millstones are actually on display at the St. Boniface Museum. But again, so more river alterations that have happened, throughout the years. So regarding, Lena shared a lot about what is happening with the rural river health, and we see, of course, our urban watershed being downstream of the the Seine River sees a lot of that come through us, all of it come through us. But we also have some issues that turn up within the urban watershed. So particularly stormwater runoff from retention ponds, which can drain directly into the Seine River, particularly if we have like a huge rain or high flows coming in, and that can come in without being decontaminated at all. So we're seeing, roadway chemicals, brake shavings, fertilizers, anything that's, garbage can all get washed in there. And of course, this can overwhelm and damage aquatic habitats like harming fish, plants, and make it unsafe for recreation when we have, people who use the waterways for paddling. And so most of the urban watershed is covered in pavement and hard surfaces. So rather than that water seeping into the ground and being able to be filtered by natural means through the plant life and vegetation, and then flowing slowly into the Seine, it just runs over those hard surfaces and flows directly into the river and comes washing in there. So again, salt, anything off the road is going to come in. And over time, of course, this can create cloudy water. This can contribute to algae growth and eutrophication that Elena had mentioned earlier, which, is of course detrimental to the fish habitats and aquatic life and animals who depend on the Seine River, as well as the riparian zones. So the riparian zones are that buffer of trees and wildlife that we have on the sides of the river, on the riverbanks. So this past summer, the Manitoba Wilderness Committee actually conducted some water testing, particularly around Happy Land Park. And you may have seen this in the newspaper. They found some alarmingly high levels of E. coli. It was only one test, so we don't have, verification, as it wasn't done in repeated testing. And nor how do we know where that came from, whether it was animal, whether it was human. But regardless, the presence of E. coli is an indicator that we have some fecal contamination or potential presence of harmful pathogens. And so it indicates to us that we need more public awareness and improved stormwater management to make sure that we're keeping our waterways clean. So another issue that we've seen since early settlement has been the development and urban growth along the Seine River, which has removed a lot of the Seine River's riparian zones. So the riparian zones include the river channel, the riverbanks and the floodplain, and any nearby uplands. And many of those have been lost or damaged as we have seen more, builds of homes and infrastructure, and they are vital for a healthy riverbank. So riparian zones stabilize the riverbanks. They help prevent erosion. Their roots hold the soil in place, so they reduce sediment that would otherwise just be washed directly into the river. And they also act as a natural filter. So they absorb nutrients and pollutants before they actually reach the river. And then the plants and trees actually provide cooling for fish and aquatic life by providing shade. So that regulates the water temperature, provides food and shelter for fish, birds, and insects. And of course, these green corridors also support our pollinators, our bees, our butterflies, and the native species that help to support biodiversity. So when we see these areas removed and replaced with hard surfaces, essentially our riverway loses its natural protection. So in many places, we have drainage pipes that are from farms and developments are now sending water straight into the Seine. So they're bypassing these natural buffer zones. And without this riparian vegetation to slow and filter the flow, we see more sediment, fertilizer, and pollutants enter the river. So this is adding stress to what is an already sensitive ecosystem. So what we're left with here is a struggling, shrinking watershed. So before our altered diversions and drainage projects, we had a much larger watershed, captured a lot more rainfall, a lot more snow melt from a wide area that helped to sustain flows year round. And of course, the level of that flow would change depending on the season. But to put this in perspective, our original watershed would have captured enough annual participation to fill about 464,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Right, so now our smaller watershed captures barely two-thirds of that, only about 269,500 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So our historical area, as you can see, 2,150 square kilometers now to 1,248 kilometers squared. And so this is significant, shrinkage of our original watershed. So years of modification have really compounded the effects over time. This is sort of a situation of, death by a thousand paper cuts. And but don't worry, it's not doom and gloom. We're going to get to all the good news we have in a moment. And I'm going to actually pass it on briefly to Richard to have him speak to the map here to get a bit of a sense of what this means for our watershed right now. What does this look like? And Richard, oh yeah, you're muted. Good.
Yeah,
Go.
thanks, Chris. Yeah, I'm unmuted. Um, yeah, so this is the Seine River watershed, and this is a bit of a difficult map to interpret. And I'm going to hopefully help simplify. Elena has talked about all this already. I don't have a laser pointer here, but I'll try and explain this. So this is the original watershed. The area, the really light blue area. This is the area affected by the Manning Canal. Right. And the area just to the north of that light blue area, that one there, is the Uville Drain. So actually going back a little bit, so as Elena mentioned, the watershed originally was a lot of wetlands and bogs, and agricultural practices don't do that well in wet areas. And the idea is to get the water off the field to get the crop in the ground, and that's the way it works. So the water was channeled, and we had a lot of drains and a lot of and it flushed the water off the system much quicker. But then all of a sudden we had flooding, and we had flooding in urban centers. St. Anne was one that was affected several times: 1919, 1927, 44, 50, and 55. So what they did is they decided we've got to protect St. Anne and some of the other communities along the Seine River. And so the Manning Canal waters and the Uval drain waters were then diverted into the Red River, sort of a long, long channel and went right to the west into the Red River. So that is approximately 700 square kilometers, 715 square kilometers of those two. So that was diverted. Then the floodway was created to protect Winnipeg from the big floods, the Red River floodway. And a couple of things happened there. And Lena mentioned this as part of the floodway system. The area, that area right to the northernmost area, that area there, all those agricultural drains were intercepted into the floodway. So the Seine River lost all that area as well. And that is another 188 square kilometers. And that essentially is it for the diversions. But then what happened when the floodway was built, as Elena mentioned, they had to find out what to do with the Seine River. So the Seine River was basically channeled underneath the floodway. And that had the Seine River siphon, and it did, gravity flow through there. But there were problems with some of the structures, and there was some leakage in there, and then also the inlets were, trying to protect against debris. They had grates on them, trash racks, and those were plugged. And so, as Lennon already mentioned, there's a lot less flow going into the Seine. So, and then the last program there was, as Lennon mentioned, was the Grand Point diversion. When the Grand Point diversion was constructed, that was at the same time they did actually do some fixes to the Seine River siphon, the aqueduct underneath the floodway. And so they made some improvements there, but then the trash rack that was put up at the Grand Point diversion, that tended to plug. The other thing that happens when some of these systems plug, like this whole system is regulated, and if the water gets too high in the Seine River, it will bypass into the floodway or to the Red River directly. But that's to protect against flooding in the Seine. But the thing is sometimes if the trash racks fill, it basically the water comes up. It's not because it's flooding, it's because the trash racks are plugged. And so then anyway, the Seine River tends to lose some of its water that way too. So that's kind of the nutshell there, and how that map works. So basically, if you go back to the map, Chris, one last time. Mm-hmm. So go to the east there, southeast, that whole checkered area there, that water, and as well as the sort of darker blue one, yeah, that is all water that is the water that is now can still flow into the Seine. That's the upstream watershed is now flowing into the urban Seine. But again, there can be issues with if it gets too high, then it gets diverted into the Red or the floodway. So
awesome. Thanks so much.
That's all I've got there.
Appreciate it. All right. So we're going to move on here because it's not all doom and gloom, right? There's some hope on the horizon. So the good news is there's a lot of people who've been working really hard to help heal the Seine River and the Lake Winnipeg Drainage Basin as a whole. And so the next few slides, we're going to look at what you can do to help the Seine River and what Save Our Seine has been doing. So one of those visible and ongoing efforts of Save Our Seine has been the River Keepers team. And so each year, Save Our Seine hires a small but really dedicated team, ages 15 to 29, and they spend the spring and summer months along the Seine River, removing litter, removing debris. They report erosion, they report any pollution issues, and they keep the trails and the riverbanks safe and welcoming for everyone to enjoy. So it's incredibly challenging, hard hands-on work. You can see from these pictures, this is no small feat. But by doing this work, they help to protect wildlife. And I'm going to move ahead a slide and then come back to this one. because I want to give you a sense of what's coming out of this river. So in 2023, these are the stats that were removed. We had 107 garbage bags consisting of, various garbage that would have been diverted into the river, 92 pieces of treated wood, 55 metal objects, 18 tires, 17 shopping carts, 6 chairs, 6 bicycles, 3 wooden pallets, 3 knives, 2 doors, 2 street signs, a box spring, a bed, a couch, a projector, an oil drum, and my very favorite, a creepy doll, and a large road sign. So Save Our Seine has actually been in the midst right now of completing a garbage study to find out why do all of these things keep showing up in the Seine River. And part of it we know already is that, of course, what during the water that is anything on the street is flowing directly in, but also that this was an old garbage dump. And if you've ever gone, in past tobogganing at Garbage Hill, you might be familiar with some things that start pushing themselves out of the land. So some of this might be also just old remnants of garbage that is turning up. But so that garbage study is going to help to reveal to us a little bit more information. And so back to our river cleanup here, there's a number of things that you can do to help here. So one is, of course, conserve water. So as Elena mentioned earlier, when we have this overflow of water, we see that water flow directly into the drains into the river untreated. And so anything that if you have, you know, a leaky oil spill in your car or anything like that, that's coming off. And particularly, we don't want to contribute to that overflow. So if there's a storm outside, don't be having your shower at your bath at the same time. Want to dispose of waste properly. So any household materials, wrappers, garbage, anything like that, it goes somewhere, right? And in a heavy rain, it can quickly be washed down to our sewers and right into our rivers. So please make sure those are disposed of properly and avoid mowing and trimming to the water's edge. And so we want to be able to leave that buffer zone to help keep things out of the river, and to have that natural filtration system in place. But also, when we talk about not putting things in the river, it's not only don't put garbage or have any, foreign debris in, but even things like if you have a property on the river and you're mowing your lawn and you're dumping your lawn clippings into the river, this itself, like that, those lawn clippings will decompose, and decomposition uses up oxygen, which can, if we have this happening in a lot of areas, that's going to also contribute to that eutrophication of that, low oxygen levels in the river. So we don't want to be dumping anything in our rivers. And of course, volunteer, help us, with our river cleanups. If you know young people who are looking to get involved, this is an excellent way. And I just want to share, for anyone who's interested in learning more about how we can keep our rivers clean in this specific way, is there's a really wonderful program called Yellowfish Road. It runs in, the one in Manitoba runs in connection with the Fort White Alive. And they have a whole program that teaches us about how our sewer systems work and what is going into our drains and what is coming into our rivers. And if you type in Yellowfish Road, they'll come up, you'll have a whole chart that tells you different things that you can do at home and how you can support healthy waterways and watersheds in your community. So I just want to make that suggestion there as another wonderful resource that we can turn to. It's put on by Trouts Unlimited Canada. All right. So green infrastructure is another way that Save Our Seine has been contributing to, oh, I'm sorry, whenever I try and move things, takes up my whole screen, to a healthier watershed. And so what green infrastructure is basically harnessing the natural assets of nature to do jobs that serve, to better our communities and to better the environment. And so basically what is old is new again, right? So turns out, when we started to urbanize and create, the city started to establish itself, we removed a lot of green space, we removed a lot of trees, we removed a lot of riparian zones. And then over time, we started to realize, oh, actually, there was a function to all those things. They were actually doing something really good. And so we did, but in the meantime, we had developed gray infrastructure, right? We had developed treatment plants and different things that, sewers to take the water off the land and different things to do to try to take care of the excess water or take care of excess nutrients or take care of any chemicals that were showing up in our water. But it turns out that, nature already had a way to manage these issues. And so green infrastructure is about harnessing nature, to serve healthier communities in this regard. So one of example is there's lots of different kinds of green infrastructure. We could be looking at rooftop gardens. We can look at, in some cities, not Winnipeg, they have permeable pavement, which allows water to pass through the pavement and into the ground. Um, Even trees can be seen as green infrastructure as they have a cooling effect on the city. And so planting them throughout the city helps to cool the city as a whole. But one of the ways that we've been employing green infrastructure with Save Our Seine has been the creation of rain gardens, specifically the Niagara Rain Garden at Fermor and St. Anne's. So if you ever go shopping at that superstore right at Fermor and St. Anne's, it's right at the south side of the parking lot. And this allows water to storm water to flow off the parking lot. And so the roof as well, the superstore will divert that to the parking lot. It flows off the parking lot and off the streets into the rain garden instead of into a sewer. And so as it comes off of the garden here, it actually biodegrades, right? So anything, litter, sediment, like it gets trapped here, it doesn't float into the sewer itself, and it slows down that flow of the water so that some filtration can happen. And so then over time, what we see here is that the water coming into the Seine from this parking lot specifically moves into a storm drain, but now it's been filtered through natural means and runs through an underground pipe into the Seine River. So not only does this provide, a actually very useful service to us, but it also supports pollinators. It's beautiful. It supports other water life, and also just adds a beautiful green space to sit in here. And so I'm going to have Chris speak a bit to this in a moment, but I just want to first let you know how you can help. And so we do have, you can plant rain gardens in your own home. In fact, if you look up the Seine Rat River Watershed District, and I'll put these links in the chat at the end of our session here. You can they teach you how to create a rain garden, and some of you may be eligible for some financial support to put in a rain garden to capture the runoff on your property or from your sump pump. So all of these can be really, really helpful. Planting trees, if you live on a retention pond, naturalizing that retention pond, so not mowing to the edge. And I'm going to let Chris speak more to that a little bit as well. And so here's some pictures I'm going to let Chris speak more to.
Okay. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. Um, uh, a vegetation, since about the mid 70s, a huge body of literature has emerged, and there's still new research going on about how plants and how wetlands remove various kinds of pollutants. Now, before development and large-scale industrialization, there were plants on the landscape, and there was no requirement for them to clean anything because they just existed. And now we're finding that things like wetlands and rain gardens have a significant capacity to take out large quantities of uh, hydrocarbons, uh, like gasoline and oil, uh, excess nutrient. Excess nutrient is what's causing all the problems in Lake Winnipeg, specifically excessive phosphorus and excessive nitrogen. Before Winnipeg was here, before a large-scale development occurred on the landscape, nutrients generally were in very short supply, and vegetation had developed very efficient means to scour their environment for things like macronutrients, things they need a lot of, like nitrogen, phosphorus. So it turns out that we found out that plants can take a lot of these impurities that are now ubiquitous in our environment out before they head into downstream receiving water, like the Seine River, the Red River, the Assiniboine, and eventually Lake Winnipeg. Now, many Probably people in the St. Boniface area, probably throughout Winnipeg, have noticed that there's a lot more of these, what we're calling naturalized retention ponds popping up. And that is true. That's been happening since about 2003, starting with Royalwood and then Sage Creek and Bridgewater and South Point. Um, I was actually part of the team that helped implement the first one here, so I have a little bit of background information. The concept of naturalizing these wetlands differs from the conventional wetland, in which the conventional stormwater retention pond, which is just basically mowed lawn right down almost to the stormwater pond's edge, and then the shoreline consists of large quantities of limestone or granite, which is very expensive to bring in and place and to maintain and replace eventually. Every 10, 15 years, 20 years, these things have to get replaced. So the idea was pitched that instead of riprap, why don't we put down cattails? And also, why not undertake some bathymetric contouring below the normal water line to create shelves, submerged shelves and benches, even submerged islands of cattails, bulrushes, sedges, different kinds of wetland grasses. The city, long story short, the city agreed to it. The developer was all over it because it was an environmental no-brainer, because the literature had suggested that uh, you can take enough nitrogen and phosphorus out of these lakes, which are fed by overland runoff, right? Off of pavement, off of roofs, off of parking lots, massive amounts of water going directly down to pipe without any kind of filtration through grassy swales or other wetland forebays, directly into the sewers and directly into these retention ponds, where when it was just riprap or eventment around the shoreline, essentially these stormwater retention basins were there storing water, where they became known for excessive algae, particularly blue-green algae, excessive nutrients, sometimes a smell. Now that we've got these wetland style stormwater retention ponds, their stated purpose is still simply to store water so nobody's walkout basement gets flooded. But oh, by the way, we're importing this very significant capacity for wetlands to scour that water for excessive nutrient pollutants, find a way to store, dissipate, or remove these pollutants as well. Some of these pollutants, like phosphorus, is stored in the flocculant down in the bottom under the water, where there's some soft decomposing plant material. That's a huge, almost unlimited storage bank for excessive nutrients. So what we're seeing here since the 2002, we're seeing these wetland style retention ponds proliferating across the landscape. They have next to virtually no maintenance is required, but the water leaving these retention ponds, particularly those feeding into the Seine River eventually, like Sage Creek and Royalwood, who feed directly into the Seine River, almost directly anyways. The water leaving these retention ponds, they're set at a certain elevation. We get a 4-inch rain over a few days. All that water slowly trickles out of the retention pond after having been stored for a little while, getting a little hang time in the wetland. The water leaving these retention ponds is actually cleaner than the receiving water in the river itself. So it's the presence of this wetland functionality that has been imported into these built and engineered human structures that make these kind of like green infrastructure. The city doesn't refer to them specifically or classify them as green infrastructure, but essentially that's what they are. They're just built to store water, so that's one thing, but they're also have the side effect of cleaning the water significantly. They're not built to clean the water, but enough wetland capacity has been built into it that that's exactly what it does. Not everybody can just build a retention pond on their property or have the need to. So a rain garden is almost like a nice little substitute that you could incorporate as part of your general landscaping. They're very simple to do. You just need to capture some of the water, as Chris was saying, coming off of your roof or draining off some sort of hard surface, and capture it, and then slowly release it into the ground, where it's like in my neighborhood. Excuse me. I live a couple of 100 feet away from the Seine River, so I don't have curbs on my frontage. So I just I have a rain. This is the shot of a rain garden here on the bottom right hand side. And it's just, you can put whatever, you don't have to put native plants in if you want. You can put in irises or daylilies, things that can tolerate a little bit of feet wet conditions, prolonged feet wet conditions. The water soaks into the soil, and then essentially oversimplified, it follows the clay to geometry on down to the river, which is about 150, 200 feet away from where I live. Um, the rain gardens, there's a certain procedure. That's maybe a different presentation, but what it does is as the water soaks into the soil, it sheds a lot of those impurities through microbial activity. For instance, any gasoline or oil that's running off the street into my rain garden gets mineralized or processed in the soil and is long gone by the time that same water enters the river adjacent to us.
Mhm. Wonderful. Thanks, Chris.
You bet.
All right, so back to these golf courses. So we know that there are 3 golf courses along the Seine River. Believe it's the Niagara Golf Course, the Windsor Golf Course, and St. Boniface. Is that correct? I believe that's the 3.
Yeah.
And so Niagara Golf Course has partnered with Save Our Seine to become an Audubon certified cooperative sanctuary. And so what this means is that they actually designed their course to create wildlife habitat. They look at conserving water, reducing chemical use, capturing, replanting buffer zones to limit any runoff in stormwater runoff directly into the river. So that way that the golf course itself is helping to filter pollutants and help prevent erosion, make space for birds and pollinators, and of course, just sort of rewild the area a little bit more. And so you can learn more actually on their website. They have a lot of information about what the project that they've undertaken with Save Our Seine helping as a consultant, and I believe with some planting projects as well. But this is a great example of how private landowners can work together for private stewardship. So what you can do here is if you are part of any golf courses or memberships in this sort of area, um, trying to support Audubon certification, and maybe even maybe some of these courses don't know about it. So educating them so that they can reduce their pesticide use and they can support more natural areas near water. So even one restored shoreline can make a huge difference to the overall health of the Seine River. It all adds up. And so one of the most well-known, I think the most well-known success story of the Seine River, Save Our Seine, is the Bois des Esprits campaign. So in the early 2000s, there was this 82-acre forest was slated for housing development. And Save Our Seine worked with local residents and they led a community campaign to protect it. And so through advocacy, through fundraising, and partnerships with the city of Winnipeg, they purchased the land and preserved it as a public green space. And now, today, it is one of the city's most beloved natural spaces. It's a key part of the Seine River Greenway. And this work is continuing as Save Our Seine is currently looking to protect the river bottom forest at the former Simcoe lands, which is just south of the perimeter, which is also now slated for development. They also were key in advocating for the restructuring of the floodway, because as we mentioned earlier, there was leaks, there was inconsistent flow, there was plugged trash racks, and so they helped to restore healthier aquatic habitat downstream by advocating for that restructuring. And they actually brought attention to a huge uh, issue near the former Honeywell site. So basically, there was the largest decontamination project in Manitoba history. There was an IKO shingles plant that was on site on the banks of the Seine River in St. Boniface. And the banks were the river itself was heavily contaminated with coal tar and other chemicals, and it had actually seeped underneath the riverbed. And so Save Our Seine brought attention to this issue, and they pushed for action for nearly 15 years. And 2008 to 2009, Honeywell International completed Manitoba's largest river decontamination project, or one of them. So they actually had to remove species. They had to temporarily divert the river itself to reach the affected areas. And then they replanted with native vegetation to restore a healthy riparian area. So Save Our Seine was there planting 100 trees to celebrate that restored shoreline. But that was a huge undertaking. And this was actually a picture from just a few weeks ago. Riparian zone care is a huge piece of what Save Our Seine has been doing. So taking care of that protective barrier along the Seine River by removing invasive species, planting native species, and helping with bank stabilization as a result. And so some of us are probably familiar with, seeing a lot of thistle in the area, but one invasive species that's particularly concerning along the Seine River is European buckthorn. So it is a species that can spread quickly and form dense thickets and block sunlight and prevent other plants from growing. And so when this happens, it starts to take over a space. And then as we see old growth, like larger trees die off, we are left with an area that is full of buckthorn. It is, the soil is less stable. It really has no benefit to our native wildlife or to the birds or the pollinators in the area. And we quickly lose that biodiversity. So Save Our Saying goes, they go in, actually Chris himself leads a lot of these initiatives. They remove the species in controlled areas. They plant native shrubs and pollinator plants and grasses to help reestablish themselves and to ensure a healthy root system, which is then going to, of course, help with that water filtration. It's going to stabilize the riverbanks, and it's going to take care of it for future generations to continue enjoying it. So how you can help is there's a lot of community initiatives and invasive species removal on our calendar. If you're part of the newsletter, that shows up as well. And so there'll be planting days and buckthorn removal days. I know there's a group that meets as well that goes and regularly removes some volunteers remove just in their own time during their walks outside of these specific events, but they're educated on what to look for. But yeah, so helping with that tree planting and removal is one wonderful way to contribute. And so the goal of Save Our Seine isn't just to clean and restore the rivers, it's also to help people understand why the Seine River matters and how they could be a part of protecting it and how you can build a relationship with the Seine. So I think one of the things that I appreciate the most is that the work that Save Our Seine has done has made an accessible place for people to really connect with the nature on the Seine River, to connect with the river itself. And when we love something and connect with it, we start to care for it in really meaningful ways. And so this year, they've provided a lot of tours in the past. This year, we've done 4 tours along the Seine River on different topics. We have this webinar, another webinar coming up in January. We've recently created a number of school resource materials that are aligned with the Manitoba curriculum that are being released onto our website. There are online resources. Elena mentioned the hydrology map. There's a hydrology map. There's also a history of the Seine River map, which is that you can also find online, which is a really wonderful resource. And there's community events that show up like that where you can go out and you can learn like at these planting days as well. So one way that you can contribute in this matter is, spread the word, let people know that, these resources are available if you have teachers in your life, or if you want even to go on some of these resources have been adapted into self-guided resources. So you can go online and use them yourself, attend events, and help us spread that, build those relationships and spread that knowledge. So we have about 5 more minutes here, and I'm going to, well, we got about, first, are there any questions? We're gonna just give you guys a bit of feedback form as well, but are there any questions that you're left with that you'd like answered? You can feel free to unmute or place in the chat.
I have a question.
Yes.
Elena had mentioned that a source of phosphorus and nitrogen was from hog farms. I'm just wondering, like, what is the comparative contribution between hog farms and just like crops, like fertilization of crops versus like an actual pig farm?
Well, I think the phosphorus comes from not just the hog farms. I believe it's just that we happen to have the most intensely developed hog industry in that area, but there's other agriculture and as well. But Chris, do you know what if there's a difference between the phosphorus that comes from the agriculture versus livestock?
We don't have I don't have a breakdown of those kind of numbers, but I would say that it's another straw being added to the camel's back sort of thing. Most of the nutrient input into the Seine or the red or the Assiniboine happens during the spring freshet, like by by a long shot, and then during heavy rain. So there's that. With hogs, I think what they do is they treat that. They do have some pretty stringent regulations around what the chemistry of, let's say, lagoons, hog lagoons are. I believe the threshold that you need to reach for phosphorus concentrations is something like 1 milligram per liter. If you have concentrations greater than that, you can't release into the environment, into headlands, into ditches, directly into a river or anything like that. But as far as an actual breakdown, I don't actually have that comparison. We should take care, though, to not come down too hard on the ag industry at all, because a good chunk of the nutrient, for instance, and other pollutants then into our river systems comes from our cities. We have like a considerably more hard surface now, so direct runoff. There's less water infiltrating into the ground. We can't really use perforated concrete here, or like the kind of concrete that rain just soaks into, because the rain has to go someplace. And here in Winnipeg, like in Regina, it just goes directly into clay. Then when you get into like fall freeze thaw, spring freeze thaw, you get a lot of heaving. So we really can't use that perforated concrete much. But anyways, the point is that cities are a culprit too, but we don't have a breakdown between hog industry and traditional cereal crop farming.
I just want to let people know for time so we can just keep on with questions, but I've put a link in the chat as for a feedback form as well as for our newsletter sign up if you'd like to have more information about upcoming events. And you can also scan the QR code to fill out a surveys in case didn't want to make sure no one missed that before our end of our session here. But are there any other questions?
Yes, I have a question about beaver activity because it's so controversial. And the river, I've seen it in low flow season when it's just algae and nothing's moving. And then the beaver get active, as they have at the moment, in near Leah Remelard School and north of Bois d'Esprit. Bois d'Esprit, it's controversial, it's been spoken about, it's been written about. Now it's becoming more controversial near the Leah Remelard School. I just wonder how we can be educated and have a better voice, and how community can come together on it rather than be divided on it, because I think it's education. Yeah, it's at a critical point in the season now.
I could jump in and maybe address that if you'd like.
Yeah, great.
Chris, yeah, just really quickly, like beavers, if our property is back onto, like if we live in the proximity of the Seine River, we want to experience the river, we have to experience all the things that the river has to offer. And sometimes it's beavers knocking down 3 or 4 trees, or 10 or 20. I know it's hard to see that, but most of the trees that occur on our river bottom have a tendency to sucker out. So let's say there's a bunch of Manitoba maple down there, a flood tolerant tree. You find them right near the river's edge. Beaver comes in, knocks down a small forest of it. You will notice that Manitoba maple, this isn't their first rodeo, or basswood, or elm, or cottonwood. They'll send out suckers. So what happens is when the beaver takes down one stem, yeah, it makes a significant difference. It increases the light, it changes the environment significantly. But that same maple will send up 4 or 5 more stems, which don't take long to get into the tree canopy height. So it's one of those things where it's like we can't go off and like get rid of beavers just to preserve some trees. They're a part of the whole system. And when a beaver knocks down a tree, it actually creates opportunities for other plants that would not have grown there uh, under shady conditions. And we're seeing that lots of native plants bounce back, come back, and so there's a spike in biological diversity sometimes in coverage when some trees are knocked down, but they come right back.
Thanks. I mean, I love the beaver and I love what they do, and I love the river because it's dammed, because
Mhm.
there's flow.
Mhm.
What I'm scared of is that the beaver dam's being blown up, or the beaver being taken
Oh, oh
away.
yeah. You're talking about
Um,
water backing up, probably. Yeah,
yes,
that's
yes.
different. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's just education, because there's so many different views,
Mhm.
and I just wonder whether there couldn't be more education on activity, the positive activity of beaver, you know,
Yeah.
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 Well, and behind those dams, and I mean, Richard could probably speak more to this. I want to make sure I honor our time as well, but that creates pools for fish that are beneficial, right? While it does block some upstream passage, there's benefits to those dams for aquatic life as well, right? I'll let Richard maybe add on that. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, I can speak to it a little bit. I mean, as I talked about, it was interesting. We did a walk on the Seine about 2 weeks ago, and we'd done before that, we'd done a pre-walk and looked at areas we were going to talk about. And we'd gone to one area where there was some beaver activity. And 2 days later, when we passed on the thing, there was a tree down. So the beaver had been active right then. It was interesting. So these things happen. Um, One of the things is that from an aquatic perspective, if, habitat, I mean, there's pros and cons to beaver dams, right? And so they do provide storage of water. They do provide when you get a beaver dam and you do provide some fish habitat. It does potentially block upstream movements of fish. Um, changes the habitat in the area where it might have been a sort of a evenly flowing section of river. Now, all of a sudden, when you get a beaver dam there, you've got a pool. So you've got, very low velocity. It's a different habitat. One of the other things about the Seine River is that it is also a recreational area. And so canoeists are not going to be, or kayakers are not able to travel up and downstream past the beaver dam. There's pros and cons. I mean, one of the things now, I think there's been some beaver, someone has commented about the beaver dam that you're talking about, Fenella, to Save Our Seine, and Save Our Seine has contacted the city naturalist, I think, and what are they going to do about it? Um, the beaver dams are what we call ephemeral for the most part. They come and go. They will blow out. That one at Leo Remillard School sounds like it's been there for a long time. Um, yeah, it's one of these things where there's pros and cons to it, and it is not an easy thing there's no black and white.
Okay. Well, we're at time now. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. It's been a pleasure getting to share some of this information with you in the works of Save Our Seine. Save Our Seine is entirely an organization dependent on volunteer and community support. And so we really appreciate you coming and checking us out more and finding ways to get involved or bringing in any of your wonderful skills to the table. And so, yes, I want to wish you a wonderful rest of your day and thank you so much for joining us.